Reconstructive memory by Bartlett, 1932, also known as Schema theory. Reconstructive memory is the theory that memories are not exact copies of what is encoded and stored, but affected by prior experiences and prior knowledge in the form of schemas. Schemas are plans/scripts that are built using experiences about everyday life that affects the processing of information. Schemas are ideas and scripts about the world that gives you expectations and rules about what to do. Memories are reconstructed from previous knowledge and memories. Recall is affected by previous experiences. We alter information stored in our memory during recall based on prior expectations and knowledge. We draw on our schemas to do this. Bartlett says that we shouldn't divide memory into parts or treat it as separate. We don't remember all we perceive. We draw on schemas to fill in the gaps in event/memory. Memory is reconstructive. Perception is the neurophysiological process, including memory, which an organism becomes aware of and interprets the external stimuli. Bartlett wanted to test precipitation. Bartlett wanted to test this by presenting participants with shapes and objects. He found that participants assigned verbal labels and names to each one, and later used those shapes to represent the object drawn after. Therefore, he concluded that precipitation shape is determined by how it was remembered. Individual differences. Interpretation is influenced by past experiences, schemas, so this is unique to the individual. This test will be different for every single person. Imagining. Bartlett did another experiment where he showed ink blots to the participants and found they rummaged about in their own stored images to find the best ones suited. The most common response were animals or plants. Bartlett suggested that the answers were given based on participants' own interests and experiences. He coined the term effort after meaning, as the participants spent a lot of effort trying to connect the stimuli with their knowledge, and after the meaning had been established, it can readily be assimilated. Remembering. Bartlett used the War of the Ghost folktale, as it would be unfamiliar to the participants due to it having an unrational story order. In one condition, 20 participants used a serial reproduction where they read a story twice and had to recall it in a few minutes, weeks, months, and years later. He found the story shortened due to omission and the language modernized. For example, the canoe turned into a boat and the presence of ghosts was rationalized. This led to Bartlett to conclude that memories are reconstructed each time they are recalled, so the accuracy is lower and it is prone to distortion and rationalization. Therefore, the process of is constructive and influenced by inferences made by an individual. Refuting research. Wynn and Logie, 1998. Their aim was to see if familiar stories would change in the same way Bartlett found with unfamiliar stories. They asked uni students to recall their first week. They were asked to do this several times throughout the year. They found the accuracy of their descriptions remained the same no matter how many times they were asked to recall the information. In conclusion, memories that are familiar will not change over time. However, it's hard to measure the accuracy of these stories. How do we know that they are actually telling the truth? How do we know that this is what actually happened? However, it is high in ecological validity, as this is a memory from everyday life. It does have practical applications. When two people are telling a story, they may recall it differently, and this explains why. It teaches us we must be careful when it comes to listening to or believing eyewitness testimony accounts, as they may not be true. However, this theory does support that memories from familiar events will not change over time, and therefore, maybe memory isn't as reconstructive as we thought. Loftus and Plamer, they wanted to see how eyewitness testimony affected the recalling of events. They wanted to see if language used in eyewitness testimony could alter memories. They used an opportunity sample of 45 university students. In a lab experiment with 5 conditions, participants were shown 7 films of traffic accidents, ranging Speed. I know it says time on there, I mean speed, I'm sorry. Participants were then asked how fast were the cars going when they smashed, collided, bumped, hit, or contacted with each other, with the verb changing. Loftus and Plamer estimated the speed given was affected by the verb used, so the implied information about the speed systematically affected the participants' memory. If it was something like smashed, the speed was given on average higher than hit. Results show that the verb conveyed an impression of what the speed was and altered the participants' perception. Therefore, eyewitness testimony can be biased depending on the way questions are asked after the crime is committed. Loftus and Plamer supports the idea of reconstructive memories as it shows how eyewitness testimony can be reconstructive. Reconstructive memory is to do with nurture. It suggests that we use schemas to build up past experiences to alter memories when they are recalled. This is all to do with the knowledge that you have gained throughout your life and is not to do with anything genetic or biological. Strengths of reconstructive memory. Application. The idea of schemas can be used to help dementia patients. Application. Both the support for eyewitness testimony and the game, Chinese Whispers, shows how our memory is reconstructive. Validity. Those supporting research as reconstructive memory is similar to Turing's idea of long-term memory being semantic, so they support each other. Other supporting research, you have Wilder Gerthy of eyewitness testimony, you have all the other Bartlett's research that I have talked about. This theory is highly reliable due to the research support. Weaknesses of reconstructive memory. Reliability. Bartlett's studies aren't scientific. He used Cambridge students and tested them without using a standardized procedure. One of his tests was carried out in the streets. Application. What the Ghost is not an accurate representation of a memory used in everyday life. Wynn and Logie is a much better example of that. It could be suggested that he orchestrated it in a way to fit his theory. Counterpoint. He repeated this with 8 different stories on different participants and found the same thing: shortening, transformation, and familiarization. Therefore, the memory of all types of stories or objects is subject to some kind of errors. Similarly to episodic and semantic memory, this doesn't actually explain how memory is reconstructive. It describes reconstructiveness, but instead of explaining it or how it is active. Both Bartlett and Loftus use artificial tasks which are not applicable to everyday life. This lacks ecological validity.